So in this PowerPoint, we're going to be reviewing the analysis and findings. So according to Edwards D, there are a variety of approaches used in disseminating research findings, but commonly the use of journal publications and professional presentations in conferences and meetings are preferred. But before such presentation is actualized, authors are encouraged to make substantial input into the content of study findings and general outlook and structure of the paper, according to Edwards. So if we look at the introduction of the findings, well, at the beginning of each chapter provide an introductory note in which you briefly discuss the objective upon which the chapter is embedded. What is the objective of this? And you can link back to the objectives in terms of your aims and objectives at the beginning of your research paper. Research studies are normally based on some objective, normally divided into the main objectives and some specific objective. When presenting the chapters on results or findings, each chapter shall be based on each specific objective of the study. When we are presenting the data, in this section it is advisable to start by presenting the data of the results as generated from the field. This is where you get the percentages, the figures, the charts, the tables, the coefficient, and all of these are presented. So you need to use this information to tell the reader, what the response to specific questions or discussions actually were. What were the key themes of the focus of group discussions? What percentage of respondents gave a specific response for what example? So here you're providing all your charts, data, tables, and you're giving what the data actually shows in terms of your collation. If we take this example of research, we can see here just one example of a frequency table in terms of percentages, and then we're going to look at some of this data taken from a specific research paper in hospitals. We can see they summarized it by the overall aim of the study was to determine the extent of the delays facing the patient with AMI at this hospital, time of arrival till the thrombolytic agent was administered. The majority of cases presented, 46%, were in the age group of 41 to 50-year-olds, followed by 24% in the 51 to 60 age group and 20% in the 31 to 40 age group. Only 3% of the subjects were in the age group between 25 and 30 years. So the minimum age found in this study of a person who suffered AMI was 25 and the maximum was 72. The mean was 46.9 years of age. So we can see how you are actually presenting your data. Is interpreting the data. So after presenting the data, it is advisable that you give your own scholarly interpretation of the same with regards to the objective in question. For example, what does the high or low percentages actually indicate? What does the key informant response of the question point to? What does the overriding theme from which the focus group discussion indicate? Is the result significant looking at the coefficients? How does it relate to the hypothesis or your research question? How does the figures, percentages, or the coefficients relate to the key informant responses or focused group discussion themes? So how does this all relate? What's your interpretation of the information that you've determined? It's really about interpreting the data. An example here states that this is consistent with the findings of Zabad and Rashid in 2001, who report that 63% of the population studied were below the age of 55. Mitka states that the ischemic heart disease is increasing in developing countries and is projected to increase by 137% for the younger population. Mitka, who also reports that the Director General of the WHO declared that cardiovascular disease in prime labor years in developing countries will exceed that of the industrialized nations. The discussions and findings, and here it is expected that the results or the findings presented are collaborated or discussed with regards to the existing studies, most of which were highlighted at the background and the literature review stages. So you're linking it back to the literature review stages as well. The author must review the findings alongside other studies and determine whether the current findings either fill the gaps highlighted or not. It is expected that each finding is discussed alongside one or two studies with gaps that speak at the objective at the current study. The author shall then indicate whether the current study is inclined with the findings of the existing studies or whether they are contradictory, and how the current study is filling the gaps highlighted early in the proposal. So here we're talking about looking at your research findings, see if they met your objectives, and see how they link back to your literature review and other studies, and see if they agree to it, they don't agree to it, they contradict it, and any other findings that you added to this body of research that other authors and other papers may want to take into consideration. And use the theory to discuss the results. So the theory or theories highlighted at the theoretical review stage must also be used in discussing the study findings. The author must propose to clearly show how the tenets of the theory are useful in linking the findings of the study to the gaps it seeks to fill. This can be done by briefly roping in one or two relevant tenets provisions of the theory in making some conclusions or observations on the study findings and its attempts to fill the knowledge gaps. Section, here's an example. The sample selected comprised 18 nationalities who presented for treatment at the Al Ain Hospital from January 2002 to December 2003 as shown in table 4.1. The higher number of individuals admitted to the accident and emergency units were of Indian origin 28.97, Bangladeshi 21.18 and Pakistani 22.12. As discussed in Chapter 1, male workers from the South Asia Pacific region, including Filipinos, Bangladeshi, Indians and Pakistanis, and the majority of these workers are single males, with some having families in their own countries to support. Approximately 90% of these men from the labour force in the UAE. The findings are consistent with Yang et al.'s 2002's finding at the London Chest Hospital that patients of the South Asian origin have an increased incidence and premature coronary artery disease, and this should be considered a major risk factor in its own right. So here, the last section of each research study should always be on the recommendations for further research. This contains some of the ideas and the challenges that were experienced by the researcher during the study, but could not fit with the current study objectives, thus worth considering in another study. But these two last sections, conclusions and recommendations, there will be another PowerPoint detailing this in slightly more detail.